May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today I'm going to read to you from Thank You and OK, An American Zen Failure in Japan. The book doesn't have chapter numbers, but I am numbering them for their entry onto Audible, so this will be called Chapter 25. Koji, Bound by Duty, Hogoji, May 1st, 1988. It was break time, and Koji and I found ourselves at it again. Well, come on, man, come with me. Let's go. What's keeping you? I used to leave home with a nickel and come back 2 weeks later with a dime. Ready? I leaned over and looked into Koji's eyes. He was so excited. He knew it was possible. He loved the idea, but he couldn't do it. Why not? I pushed him. Okay, forget being a wanderer. You could be a priest in America. That would be different. That would be an education. Where's your spirit of adventure? You'd learn a lot from them, and they'd learn a lot from you. They'd learn more about working together, and you'd learn more about being free. Come on. But his story was already written, and he wouldn't even proofread it, much less attempt to rewrite. I am tied by duty, he said. And what a dutiful life he has led. At his father's poor country temple, he'd get up early, sit zazen, unusual outside of training temples, and clean the place. After breakfast, he'd work in the fields, do cabinet work in the afternoon, and go to school at night, followed by judo class. Frequently, he would give his father long massages before going to sleep. He attended the Soto Zen University for 4 years. Again, he had a full schedule, zazen in the morning and practicing karate at night. Then he went straight to Suienji and Hogoji, where he has been practicing for 4 years. Diligent life, Koji, I said. What a work ethic. You seem to enjoy it, though. You're going to be a great priest. No, I won't, but it feels good to me, he said. I envy you and do not see a way to have freedom of movement like that. So I feel I must be as good a priest as I can, help others, and find freedom of the heart. I want the same thing, except I don't want to be a priest, I said. Do you want to get married again, he asked. I think so. To the lady in Georgia? Well, let's see if she writes first. Do you miss her? Well, sort of, but it's so much fun being in Japan. I haven't had time to miss her much. I might have to forget her. I don't know yet. I think you will have a love marriage, he sighed. Years ago, he'd promised a woman he'd marry her, and she was now 30. If he didn't, then she might very well never get married, and he was afraid she might even kill herself. He just had to marry her and live with her and his parents in his father's temple and help his father out and do what was expected of him till it became his own temple. There was no way out, no honorable way out. I got a strong sense from him about what duty is and what they mean here when they say tied by duty. The more we talked, the better my Japanese got. Koji said he wanted to learn English, so we agreed to do something about it. What this meant was that I studied Japanese and that sometimes we talked in Japanese about how he wanted to study English. We were in Japan. It was natural. Anyway, saying that you want to study English is one of the important set phrases of the Japanese. One day after lunch, I told Koji that I insisted that he study English for 10 minutes a day and that his first lesson began now. Keep in mind that almost all Japanese people have studied English in junior and senior high and in college, and so they've got a good foundation for it. But the method of study goes back to the Meiji era, when the objective was to read scientific and engineering manuals in order to catch up with the rest of the industrial world. To actually speak a word of it verged on the unpatriotic. The ancient and infamous translation method, abandoned in most of the known universe, tragically still has a stranglehold in Japan. The cruelty of this system is evident when they are called upon to speak English and can't. Reading is a different matter. Koji read of human bondage in English while in college, word by word. He said that his brother was an English teacher who couldn't speak any English, although he read an English language newspaper every day. He said that once some Westerners came to his brother's school, and his brother sneaked out the back door and ran away terrified. I started Koji off with a rather advanced lesson. "Are you ready?" I asked. "What?" he said in Japanese. "Are you ready?" I repeated. He sat up in attention. "I want you to learn this sentence," I said, still in Japanese. "Hai," he said, like a good boy ready to follow the master's instructions. I recited the sentence to him. Robert's lover, the rare rabbit robber, lowered Luther's Luger through the louver. Silence. 10 seconds passed. Koji averted his eyes. "What was that?" "Pay attention," I said sternly in Japanese. "Now once more." He prepared himself, opening his mind as if for the very Dharma of Buddha. I repeated the lesson. Robert's lover, the rare rabbit robber, lowered Luther's Luger through the louver. Another moment of silence. "They all sound the same," he said, shaking his head. "They are all different words." "No, it can't be. I can't hear any difference." "I think it's going to take some time for you to master the subtleties of speaking and hearing English." "Say it again," he said, intrigued. We spent half an hour on that sentence, and though he found it fascinating, he never got it down. He said that I should open up a school of torture English in Tokyo near the temple, where he will be helping out when he goes home. I told him I'd consider it, but that his fellow countrymen seemed to be doing fine without my help. Koji looked at his watch. There was a little time left before afternoon work. He made us some instant coffee, put sugar in his, and we both added crepe, the popular non-dairy creamer. After we'd half finished our coffees, he opened a small wooden box. There was a cigarette in it, which we shared. "So, how do you like Hogoji?" he asked. "It's good, but I'm surprised that no one's been pushing me around. I thought that's what happened when you came to a new temple." "But didn't you hear what Katagiri said when he introduced you?" Some of it. Why?" "He said to treat you like an equal." That's very nice of him, but Koji, there's one problem." "Yes?" There's no such thing as equal here, is there? Isn't everybody higher or lower? Everybody but you, he said. You're equal. Thank you, and okay. An American's in Failure in Japan, Part 3. Walking. Takuhatsu. To entrust the bowl. Hogoji, May 2nd, 1988. I had been at Hogoji for a mere 4 days when we left for an outing of Takuhatsu, formal monks begging. I'd read about it and seen pictures of it in books and magazines and on TV. I'd been told about it for decades by Japanese and American monks who had done it, and tourists who had seen the begging monks on the streets in Japan. Norman regaled me with Takuhatsu stories the night before, and I was really looking forward to it. I even dreamed about it. But in my dream, it wasn't orthodox Takuhatsu. I was outside Ellen's grandparents' home in Atlanta, chanting with a guitar. She was supposed to come out and put money in it. When she got close, I was going to grab her and take her back to the monastery, but she only came to the window and looked down. Koji alone was staying behind to take care of the temple, and he begged me to remain there with him and help out. I already was taking a shine to this diligent, good vibe head monk and was flattered that he was so eager to spend time with me, but I wouldn't have passed up the opportunity to do Takuhatsu for anything. He argued that he not only needed my help, but wanted to get to know me better and that we'd have such a good time. The schedule would be practically all free. Koji's offer was tempting, but I told him I was looking forward to the experience. Then he suggested I could go the next time with him and admitted he was concerned about my back. I said that my back was getting better after the beating it had taken lugging all my bags across Japan and that walking would be therapeutic for it. So he gave up. Sunday, after lunch, Katagiri, Shuko, Norman, Mako, Jakshin, and I gathered on the deck to the kuin and put on the traditional gear of Takuhatsu. It was a sunny day, and we all wore thin black kuromo over our kimono. Katagiri pulled the linen mesh kuromo up under my waist cord to shorten it a few inches. He said it would make it easier to walk. We put on rough straw sandals that tied around our ankles, secured curious white cotton covers on our forearms and shins, and hung an extra pair of sandals at our sides. Around our necks we put our raksu, the bib-like cloth of ordination, and over them slung black, heavy cotton bags holding our begging bowls and wooden-handled bells. Then Katagiri tied a white cloth called a hachimaki around my forehead. It would stop the sweat from going into my eyes, he said. I appreciated all the attention he was giving me. I felt like I was being dressed for the prom. Last, we donned straw hats the shape of wide cones. They came down to eye level, as good as sunglasses. Katagiri pointed out to me that they had the name of the temple in large kanji across the front and solemnly admonished me to be on good behavior. I assumed a fiercely serious pose, and he laughed in spite of himself. I looked around at my almsmates, now all bedecked like me. We were dashing. Koji, Norman, and Shuko had been whispering to each other at the edge of the deck and periodically looking at me. Strange. What were they up to? After a moment, Norman came over and said they were concerned that I wasn't in good enough shape and wouldn't be able to make it. It's a rigorous practice that takes stamina, and I'm a tad overweight. Katagiri patted my stomach and said it would be good for me, but they also thought my big feet would be too tender to withstand the constant abrasion of the undersized rough footgear. Norman said they'd get covered with blisters and blood. I said not to worry, but Shuko got permission from Katagiri for me to wear traditional white Japanese socks called tabi, and he brought some along for me just in case. They have a separate pocket for the big toe, so they can be worn with sandals, but they are not part of orthodox Takuhatsu gear. After reciting the Heart Sutra at the entrance to Hogoji, we bowed toward the temple and to Koji. Then we were off down the mountain on the temple path to the narrow paved road past the rice fields and terraces with wild flowers growing all round, thatch-roofed farmhouses, kumugi oak for harvesting, wild woods and rows of shaded logs sprouting shiitake mushrooms. The sound of water running down the mountainside came from all around. The smell of spring was uplifting and delightful. At the bottom of the mountain, we entered the village of Ryumon, Dragon Gate. Children came out laughing and ran around us, calling Maku and Norman by name and remarking at Norman's and my size and strong features. Katagiri led the way and carried a staff that jingled when he brought it down at each step. We got to a bus stop after an hour of walking and rode through Kikuoka on our way to the big city, Beppu. The bus let us off in the Beppu suburbs, and we walked single file to the weekend home of a wealthy lay patron of Hogoji, Ogawa-sensei. Arriving at the front door of his semi-modern large house, we belted out our theme song, the Heart Sutra, and we were greeted by the sensei, his wife, and their 26-year-old son. We stripped off our begging gear in the entryway and were treated to the use of his large hot tub, bordered with volcanic stones and full of hot spring water, abundant in this region. We were fed a fancy meal of curried rice with meat and many side dishes. After dinner, we did the dishes and cleaned up while Mrs. Ogawa joined her husband in conversation with Katagiri. I was surprised. This is just not done in Japan. Women typically work till they drop. No one else is even supposed to enter their kitchens. Norman said he had been there to witness the transition. Ogawa Oksan, the wife, had at first strenuously resisted the monks' attempts to help, but had finally succumbed and learned to appreciate it. Ogawa Oksan says we are helping her to learn to be a modern woman and calls us feminists. Shuko explained to me that in Japanese English it means a man who helps out at home. Ogawa-sensei, who looks to be about 65, manufactures kendo, Japanese fencing, equipment, and is a master of that martial art. His son, who works and studies with his father, showed me their antique sword collection displayed in the entranceway. As we stood there admiring steel and bamboo, people started to arrive for an evening sitting downstairs in the spacious wood-floored dojo, normally used for kendo practice. The Ogawas and the kendo students sat in their loose kendo clothes. Some of the other men wore suits and ties, and the women were in casual slacks and blouses. This Zazenkai meets once a month, coinciding with the monks' monthly Takuhatsu in Beppu. That night's meeting was especially well attended because of the presence of Katagiri, who gave a lecture after Zazen. He introduced Norman as his disciple and me as his guest. I hardly understood any of what he said, as it got pretty technical, but I hadn't heard Katagiri lecture in a while, so I enjoyed it strictly for the vibes. It was the only talk that I heard him give in Japan, and it was to be my last. He never did like to say much anyway, outside of lectures, that is. As a matter of fact, the whole time I was there in Kyushu with Katagiri, he didn't even have doksan, the Soto word for formal private interview. We talked some, but I can't remember what about, so my last recollections of being with this dear friend and teacher are like quiet, simple cartoons with empty bubbles above the characters' heads. The next day, after a pleasantly late 6 a.m. zazen with the whole family, we recited the Heart Sutra outside the house and walked off briskly, single file, again to the bus stop. We rode quietly for 30 minutes. Everyone seemed calm, but inside I was tingling with excitement. Finally, the 6 of us arrived in bustling downtown Beppu and prepared to begin our ritualistic begging. We strode amid modern buildings of glass, metal, and concrete, and the hubbub of traffic. We walked past an elegant old wooden tile-roofed home with a mud wall and garden. Somebody who won't sell, I thought, looking back at it. We were surrounded by throngs of busily moving Japanese men and women in perfectly fitting, stylish Western clothes. One thing we had in common with the crowd, especially the women, was the color black. I looked over the sea of people, and black was everywhere. In their hurry, the crowd didn't seem to notice us, despite our garb. Moving intently on the sidewalk, single file, in costumes that date back a millennium, we were a time warp, a museum without walls, a pageant to the past. We stopped at a crosswalk. I watched the compact cars go by, clean and shiny, every one. In contrast to the people's black clothes, the autos were almost entirely white. Austere color scheme, I thought. I remember listening to the corny electric tune that accompanied our crossing. It was Coming Through the Rye, and it came through a speaker above the flashing, strutting figure that announced, "Walk to the sighted." These Irish tunes, where do they come from? I whispered to Norman. Ireland, he said helpfully, looking straight ahead. When the moment was right, Shuko stopped and got out his bowl. Then, using the thumb and first 2 fingers of our left hands to form a tripod, we raised our bowls to eye level and, holding the bells down with our right hand, we set out calling, "Ho!" and ringing the bells vigorously. All day long, I thought it was ho that meant the teaching, Japanese for the Sanskrit word dharma. That evening, Norman told me he'd heard it was actually an abbreviation for hatsu, which means bowl. In this case, the begging bowl. We passed old funky markets and modern convenience stores, traditional shops selling kimono, sweets, altars, incense, pottery, and scrolls, and into the crowded, covered, modern shopping streets lined with boutiques, coffee shops, and drug stores. The people were quiet, but the air was filled with loud, irritating advertisements and overlapping music broadcast through loudspeakers. A wider shade of pale faded into a pop version of Pachelbel's Canon as we worked our way down the mall. In this commercial maelstrom, one by one we'd pull out of the group at a door or open storefront, and standing erect, alone and hopefully more noble than ridiculous, would each chant the Enmei-juku Kanon-gyo loudly 3 times. Kanzeo Namu Butsu, and so on, Almost nobody understands this antiquated Buddhist Japanese any more than I understand Chaucer, but they surely know the name of Kanzeon. When they hear it, that's enough. She, or sometimes he, is Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin in Chinese, the Bodhisattva, or enlightening being of great compassion, the Virgin Mary of Buddhism. More often than not, someone would come running out and place a coin or two in the bowl. In that case, the first chant would not be repeated, and there would be a second recitation in which gratitude was expressed and boundless merit promised, Zai-o Nisei, etc. Then the monk would bow, empty the money from the bowl into the black bag around his neck, turn and walk toward the direction of the others while calling, Ho! With all of us outfitted thus and going ho in those shopping areas, I felt like we were related in a peculiar way to the Santas collecting money for charity on the street corners downtown in December in the States. After one of us was done at an entryway, he would continue on past his stationary chanting comrades until arriving at the next unsolicited doorway. Every once in a while, a person would come out and angrily shoo one of us away. An old guy did this to me. I wondered if he was from one of the fanatic sects, or maybe a person who regarded Buddhist priests as lazy, decadent leeches of society. I didn't know the chants by heart, but Norman had written them both out for me, and I tucked them inside my bowl as crib sheets. After an hour, I didn't need them anymore, but I left them in the whole first day in case I got stage fright. It was great to see lanky Norman in his monk garb bellowing out those lines from the distant past in front of a Kentucky fried chicken joint, or to witness Katagiri chanting and shaking the staff that he'd brought, rattling its brass rings in front of a pachinko parlor. He had such integrity and stood so resolutely. He brought the butt of his staff to the ground, accentuating his request for support for the priest's practice. His chanting blended with the cacophony emanated from the pachinko gambling den, the whirl and clatter of thousands of silver balls dropping through hundreds of machines, accompanied by raucous marching music. I stared and absorbed the sound, transfixed, and suddenly, unaware of my role in this rite, time melted enough to transpose onto this scene my last memory of an even shorter Japanese priest, my original teacher, Suzuki Roshi, powerfully bringing his similar staff down, the staff Alan Watts gave him, bringing it down at Dick Baker's mountain seat ceremony, bringing it down and saying goodbye in that chilling moment. That was the last time I saw him, so brown-skinned with metastasized bladder cancer. The ringing of his jangling staff was there at the pachinko parlor for a bent moment, and then it was Dainin, Katagiri's Buddhist name, again. His great patience, waiting for this Japanese pinball Vegas-colored pleasure dream to spit out a sycophantic employee who quickly dropped a coin in Katagiri's slot and darted back into the mirrors and screaming machines. That night we returned worn out to the Ogawas, to a hot bath and a feast with beer and sake, talking and laughing. Some friends of the family came over to greet us, and especially to meet Katagiri. We sat around in easy chairs and kitchen chairs, the TV on and no one paying attention to it. After more talk and laughter, the guests, who were in their 50s and older, started asking Katagiri, Norman, and me questions about America and Zen in America. At one point, Jakshin, displaying surprising nerve, came out of his depressed silence and said he understood that marijuana and psychedelics had played a significant role in America in the development of interest in Buddhism and Zazen, and what did I think about that, and how had these drugs affected my religious path? Everyone turned and looked at me, waiting for an answer. I froze with fear. In Japan, legal drugs like booze and cigarettes, or anything a doctor prescribes, are regarded as perfectly all right, and the more the merrier. But illegal drugs are all thrown together into the same heinous category and are considered to be an instant cause of insanity, death, and societal decay used only by deranged scum. I really didn't want to answer that question. I'd said something about learning from different types of experiences in our lives and added that we should avoid either seeking particular experience or trying to duplicate past ones. It was just your boilerplate American Zen anti-drug rap. This didn't satisfy Jakshin, and he pursued the topic with more insistence, asking me if such experiences had encouraged me. I turned to Katagiri, who was eyeing me eagerly, and said in English, "I'm not going to answer that question honestly. Look at those people. They wouldn't understand. They're much too conservative and narrow-minded." Much to my dismay, Katagiri took my plea for help and translated it word for word to the interested group. They said, No, please tell us." I was nervous. I didn't want to tell them anything challenging or upsetting. I'm not even sure about it myself. It's far too complicated. I admitted I'd been encouraged to pursue Zazen because of some experiences I'd had, but said that many people and events had led me along the path and that I wasn't sure what caused what. Katagiri then surprised me greatly by saying that many people had been encouraged to practice because of experiences they'd had early on with LSD and other mind expanders. He seemed completely unconcerned about saying something unacceptable. These old conservative Japanese folks, who would doubtlessly support a life without possibility of parole sentence for anyone caught with a joint, nodded seriously and made "Is that so?" types of responses to Katagiri's libertarian comments. Katagiri, incidentally, like Suzuki, back when it was an issue, asked people not to come to Zazen High. In '66, when he heard that another fellow and I had given the profits from the sale of 13 kilos of Acapulco gold to the fund to buy Tassajara, he was furious and chastised us in a lecture. Jakshin was quite pleased with the answer his question elicited. He listened thoughtfully, but wisely said nothing. That night there was no Zazen, and everyone went to sleep early except for Norman and me. He said that it was nice having me along and that he was impressed with my stamina. I said it was great to be there, and I was glad I hadn't let Koji talk me into staying behind. It was nice of him to be concerned about my back and to want me to stay at Hogoji so he and I could get to know each other better, I told Norman with a touch of pride. "Well, I'll tell you a little secret," he said. "The reason Koji didn't want you to go was that he was worried about the impression your appearance would make. He thought you'd frighten people and give the temple a bad name." "He did?" "Don't tell him I told you," said Norman, laughing. He then said good night and went to bed. I stayed up alone till midnight, studying Japanese on the concrete steps that led to the Lexus in the garage. Once I went down and looked at myself in the side mirror. I almost never look at myself in mirrors. No wonder, I thought, sympathizing with Koji. The next morning, after Zazen and service, we had a fantastic Japanese breakfast of hot rice with raw egg, a crumbled dried sheet of seaweed, and scallions, all to be mixed together. Each of us got a whole 4-inch baked fish, miso soup with tofu, a tiny potato salad, homemade daikon pickles, strawberries, melon, and green tea or coffee. While we ate, I sat on a stool at the Western-style counter and watched Ogawa Oksan whip up a sort of omelet batter and cook it in thin layers, which were then overlapped into a loaf that she wrapped in foil and added to the obento, the boxed meal she made for us. She suggested we eat it as a late afternoon snack before returning to Hogoji. After cleanup over coffee and the morning news on TV, Shuko, Katagiri, and Norman inquired into the condition of my feet and body in general. I felt invigorated and ready for more. Katagiri looked my feet over approvingly. "Very tough," he said, laughing. I did have one problem, I told them. My thighs were getting raw from sweating and rubbing together, unprotected under the robes. Katagiri called Mrs. Ogawa over and asked her if she had anything for my condition, adding that there was no time for me to diet. After they were through making fun of my weight and laughing at me, she went out and came back with a jar of salve for dry hands. I went into the bathroom and applied it. I thanked her and gave the container back. She kindly wrapped it up in a handkerchief-sized cloth and gave it to me, saying that she had no need for it. And so we were off for our second day of Takuhatsu. During the morning session, we invaded a residential area near the commercial district we'd been at the day before. After a couple of hours, we went to the home of a lay family, did a service for their ancestors at their altar, and then had a sumptuous repast that included about 35 little dishes and morsels of various sorts. After lunch and a brief rest in which we fell asleep on the living room floor, we went out for the afternoon session. The mendicant six walked swiftly toward the target area, chanting the deep and extended "ho" that were the roar of our motors. And then we peeled off like fighter planes at one door after another, each monk quickly standing at attention in his place and immediately beginning to chant so that the lines rang out like a sextet round. First Katagiri, then Shuko, Norman, Jakshin, Mako, and me, in the order of seniority, of course, together throwing our body-mind units into the dance and song of the home leavers, Buddha's kids. But we sweated like his pigs on the hottest days so far in the year. The longer we'd go without a break, the deeper we'd get into the rhythm of it, and the less we cared about our trivial concerns, pecking order, perspiration, thighs, refreshment, coins, reactions. We did it till we could hardly stand up, and it seemed that it was the chanting itself holding up our heads in bowls. An old rule of Buddhist begging is not to hit up the rich over the poor or to discriminate in any way while on the job. You're supposed to keep your eyes down and covered by the rim of your hat so you don't know who the donors are and they won't know you in a personal way. Of course, I was always peeking, being half amateur sociologist, but it was bringing form. Takuhatsu is strictly monk's practice, and it's the lay people's practice to contribute to the monks in this way. In old-time Indian Buddhism, which is still observed in Thailand and some other Southeast Asian countries, the monks weren't allowed to touch money, and begging was their grocery shopping. Since they had to eat before noon, they only went out to beg in the morning. Takuhatsu is not the sole support of these Japanese monks who touch money and eat dinner. Norman says that in the rare instances where Takuhatsu is still done in Japan, It is largely vestigial and ceremonial, but he proudly added that it covered most of Hogenji's food costs. A few people did give food. Maku, the pixie, got a small bag of uncooked rice, and Norman got some onigiri, cooked rice rolled in dried seaweed. One guy that afternoon stepped out of a liquor store and gave me a glass of sake, which I drank in a gulp in accordance with the established practice of non-discrimination while begging. There's an old Indian story about a leper whose thumb fell in a monk's begging bowl. The monk ate it without hesitation. Buddha's death is generally attributed to eating some bad meat or, in other versions, mushrooms that had been offered while he was doing his rounds. It was in that spirit that I drank the sake. Cross my heart. People would come up to us on the street and give money, not a lot, the equivalent of a dime up to a few dollars. A Catholic priest gave 500 yen, and that was neat. School kids in black uniforms gave 10 yen, or even 100, which surprised me. One old lady who was permanently bent over at a 90-degree angle saw us on a break at some vending machines drinking coffee, cold cola, oolong tea, and a sports drink named Pocari Sweat, the most popular soft drink in Japan. She hobbled slowly and pitifully over to us, opened up her cloth coin purse, and gave 6 yen to Katagiri. We collectively responded with the thanks chant, which I hope eased her obvious discomfort. One of the principal lessons that Norman says he has learned here concerns the relationship between priests and lay people and the distinctive roles of each. Here, lay are lay and monks are monks, at least when they're on duty. He says that the people support the priests to live this kind of life, and that the priests practice Buddhism for everyone, and in this way the teaching goes both ways. My lower back pain had all but disappeared. My greased thighs and my feet were fine. I was ready for more. The monks were surprised I held up so well, but this old barefoot boy from Texas who's worn beach sandals since the 60s wasn't about to cop out with protocol-breaking Tabi on the day of the hunt. This was a treat for Katagiri, too. He'd been living in the U.S. for 25 years, and you just can't have the Takuhatsu experience there. Well, you could, but it might tend to make one feel like one of those religious enthusiasts in airports. But toward the end of the day, Katagiri, the bastion of endless quiet effort, got exhausted. He didn't feel well, and Norman took him to a park where they waited for us. He looked so disappointed as he walked off. I felt bad for him, knowing he wanted to stay with us. The rhythm of Takuhatsu, the vocalizing, and the exercise definitely gave us a group high, and the interchange with the people of Beppu, though impersonal, was impressive and moving. Materialistic and modern as it is, this is obviously still a country with deep religious roots. While we were waiting for the bus to Kikuoka, we took our obento to the sunny second-floor balcony of a department store and spread them out with some additional goodies and drinks on a table that overlooked a city park. Sitting in that bare cement area in aluminum chairs with plastic straws, we chatted before our picnic, tired and hungry. I glanced around at my fellow beggars and was filled with warmth. We ate eagerly in silence. Katagiri's eyes were downcast as he chewed. Behind his head I saw storm clouds approaching. Maku served us each green tea in porcelain cups that he'd borrowed from a ramen shop inside. A wind started to blow in gusts, and it quickly became violent and noisy, Robes were blown up above knees and sleeves flapped in the air. Suddenly the sky had become dark and drops of rain were hitting the food. Staggering in the gale, we tried to move the table inside, but before we could get a grip on it, the wind seized and overturned it. Food and containers were going every which way. Maku grabbed the cups that hadn't broken. The drops came thicker and faster as we rushed to clean up our mess. Sheets of rain pelted us. Norman took Katagiri inside while the rest of us threw our soggy, half-eaten lunch remains into a trash bin that then blew over, rescattering our leftovers plus a great deal more. Circumstances being out of control, we retreated into the department store. We had barely gotten downstairs to the entrance when the storm passed. We stepped out to clean air and washed pavement. Norman took Katagiri to the Beppu bus station in a taxi. The rest of us walked in the sunshine and at least weren't dripping by the time we got on the bus to Kikuoka. At Hogoji that night, blistered and bushed, but exhilarated by the experience, we spread out our booty on tatami and counted it in the kerosene lamplight while drinking tea. The grand tally was 62,851 yen, one small bag of unpolished white rice, and an unshakable confidence in interdependence. So there we have two more chapters from Thank You and OK, An American Sim Failure in Japan. The first one pretty short and the second one pretty long. I want to make a couple of comments here. For one thing, it sort of irritates me the way I changed all the names. I guess I've commented on that enough. When I'd never published a book before, and I didn't know who would be offended by what, so I just made it where it was somewhat hidden, and only someone who really knew about it, people who knew I was there, knew the temple, the Soto-Zen temple trip in Japan would know where it was, and it still told the story. But I say we went to Beppu. The big city where we did Takuhatsu was Kumamoto. Beppu is on the west side of Kyushu, but we were in Kumamoto, which is on the east side of Kyushu. Anyway. So, hey, you know the point at which we're doing the Takuhatsu, and the guy comes out and comes out from his sake shop and picks me out of that whole group, right? Good choice. Hands me a glass of sake. Now, it's a small glass, a few inches tall, but it's full of sake. But sake is it's stronger than wine, but it's not like hard liquor. I would have drunk it was shochu. That's much stronger. I loved shochu back when I used to drink. But anyway, he handed it to me, man, and I just gulped it down and handed it back. Just got showed and kept going. I should have stopped and done the chant. Maybe I did. I don't know. I don't remember. I think I just kept going because it was sort of a little, sort of not quite kosher or something. But I should have stopped and done the whole chant we were doing to thank the donor. But anyway, when the book came out, it was well received. I had great support, wonderful blurbs. I had no idea how fortunate I was to have praise from so many people that were important. Robert Pirsig and, Vander Wettering, who wrote the first two books about studying Zen in Japan that were well known in America. Anyway, on the well, which was before the internet, the well is still going. It's out of the Whole Earth catalog crowd there. Stuart Brand's marvelous creation. The well was, it was, I think, what we call back then a listserv, and there would be topics, and you could go on and make comments on the topic, right? And you could send notes to people on it. It's been so long. I mean, listservs went out, when the internet came in, at least eventually. Well, I don't know, maybe they're still going. And there were zillions of listservs. And, one thing I remember is academic listservs were vicious. And there would be, like screaming, in a sense, you could feel screaming arguments and accusations and vitriol. And especially around political issues, but, like political science professors and stuff. I was shocked. But anyway, the well had many topics, many lists, I guess. And one of them was thank you and okay. And people commented. Oh, it was great. I was so pleased. It was very nice. And then there was one group said, we're gonna read your book in our book club. So there was some people who did that. And, they met together and discussed them. And there was one person from it that was writing me. And he said when they got to the point in their group reading of the book, or reading and discussing of the guy coming out handing me the sake and me drinking, they were disgusted and agreed to stop reading the book. And I sort of said, well, I sort of argued with him, and it not, well, there's a lot more to it than that, and that's just what they are, whatever I said. I don't have any idea. Oh, he said, well, better luck next time, buddy, that sort of thing. That's the only negative thing I can remember. I had good response from Japanese, and with a couple of exceptions from Nipponophiles, Westerners. One friend, really, who really knows Japan well, but he's very judgmental and very hard to please. And I think he felt it was sort of racist and, unfair or something. I don't know what. Hey, all right, that's enough for there. In the Takuhatsu, that group Takuhatsu, there's another type of Takuhatsu, is that monks will go out into a big city and just stand in one place, like on a street corner, and just stand there like statues. And people will go by, an occasional person will give them money. Well, it turns out that they could make a lot of money doing that. And you wouldn't see it very much, but you'd see it sometimes. Every once in a while in Tokyo or Kyoto, Osaka, those three cities I think of with it. And I knew American monks practicing in Japan who were, really didn't have any money. And when they wanted to go home to America to visit, they would do that. They would go stand on, I can't remember who or what, but maybe Norman did it. Norman, who's known in Chamwani, the founding teacher of the Omaha, Nebraska group. Anyway, I talked to guys who, stood out a few days and got enough money for a round-trip ticket to America and spending money. And I realized, my gosh, man, I could just, I could just go get some robes and stand there. And, I was a bona fide Soto Zen monk, so I could have done it. Also, I tell you, there's another thing, another way to make money. It mentions in there, it says that Koji, something like, I could get, Oh, a torture English school near where he helps out at a temple or something like that, right? Koji would make money when he was home by going to, he lived in a town north of Tokyo. It was smaller. He could go to Shinjuku, very wealthy area of Tokyo, very modern, and help out at a wealthy temple there with ceremonies, and they'd pay him good money, and that helped support him and his temple. I got paid. Maizumi's, Maizumi, who founded the L.A. Zen Center, I was visiting his brother, Bushi Kuroda. I can't remember his formal name, in Yokohama, and he had me come along. I didn't have any robes. He said, "You have robes?" I said, "No." He said, "Hey, bring some robes to so-and-so. He's a big monk," he said. His robes. He took me to a ceremony to join him, and I chanted the Shushogi with him, reading out of the book. They have a thing called furigana, where you read the characters on the side. You can read the kana. You don't have to understand the kanji. You read the kana, and it's furigana. That means side kana. And I knew how to read hiragana and katakana. And, it's like phonetic. And so the Shushogi is long. I'd never chanted it. And I helped him chant it, man. And it was like I had to completely concentrate. We were sort of chanting fast, you don't, you get through those things. This is for a family at a funeral. And so we chanted that thing. We sat together. I don't remember any of it, right? Ba, 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 ba. And then afterwards we had a festive meal with them. Ooh, I remember a lot of sashimi and sake. And the next morning, he gave me an envelope. He said, "Oh, here's for helping me yesterday." It was the equivalent of $800. I was broke. I was hitchhiking. I was, or almost broke. And then he gave me another $10,000, which is like $80. He said, "Here, take a taxi to Kamakura." He said, no need to take the train. And then he was off to Thailand. And then when he'd gone, I was ready to go. I said to his driver, I said, "Hey, would you give me a ride to the train station?" So he did. But anyway, I realized I could stay in Japan. And there was prestige in having a Westerner who can hold their own, speak some Japanese, chant. I could have stayed there and made good money doing Takuhatsu on corners and helping out with ceremonies. And, had a nice life and done anything else I wanted. I really couldn't because I was married to Elin. Oh, but that's before. I was realizing this before Elin came. But I wouldn't have done it. I generally have not made decisions in my life to do things for money. And that works out best. Just go for what, go where your heart takes you. Okay, so those are my comments on this chapter. Yeah, that was great. I really enjoyed it. It was wonderful reading it, It reminded me of all that. This has been a Q Audio podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sanur with Dogget Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.